Elise Montgomery has it all: wealth, power, and an unshakable reputation as a leading businesswoman in New York. But when a homeless man walks into an upscale restaurant wearing the necklace that belonged to her missing daughter, Chloe, Elise's world begins to unravel. Desperate to find her daughter, Elise strikes an unlikely deal with the man, Jonah, a broken soul who holds the only clue to Chloe's whereabouts. As they search for Chloe, Elise is forced to confront not only her estranged relationship with her daughter, but the dark secrets lurking beneath her empire. Secrets that Chloe might have discovered before she vanished. As danger closes in, Elise will have to choose between the world she built and the daughter she lost. But the truth they uncover will change everything, and Elise's redemption may come at the ultimate cost. In Beneath the Gilded Lies, a mother's quest to find her daughter reveals devastating truths that threaten to tear her world apart. Will Elise find her daughter in time, or will her own past destroy them both? Elise Montgomery sat at her usual table by the large window at Lealvy, an upscale restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. The view of the city below was impressive, with people bustling like ants, unaware of the luxury being savored above them. Elise's eyes flickered between her tablet and her emails, absorbed in the numbers and strategies that governed her life. The soft murmur of conversations and the occasional clinking of silverware provided a serene backdrop to her thoughts. Here, in this place of elegance and control, she could escape the chaos of the world. But today, there was a lingering tension beneath her composed exterior, a shadow that she couldn't quite place. "Would you like your usual, Ms. Montgomery?" a waiter asked, his tone polite yet distant. "Yes, the grilled salmon, please," Elise replied without looking up. It was the same order she had placed countless times before. Routine was her refuge, her shield. As the waiter left, Elise allowed herself a brief glance out the window. The city, with all its flaws, was hers to command. And yet, a gnawing emptiness persisted, a void that even the most meticulous control couldn't fill. The door to the restaurant swung open, letting in a gust of cold air. Heads turned, curious eyes scanning the unexpected figure who entered. Jonah Reed, a homeless man with ragged clothes and a worn-out expression, stood at the entrance. His hair was unkempt, his face weathered by years of hardship. Elise barely noticed him at first, too engrossed in her emails. But the murmurs grew louder. The whispers of disgust from the elite clientele reached her ears. Jonah hesitated, clearly out of place, but hunger and desperation pushed him forward. He approached a waiter, his voice hoarse. "Please, just something to eat." Before the waiter could respond, the restaurant manager, a broad-shouldered man with an air of authority, rushed forward. "You don't belong here," he barked. "Get out." The harshness of the manager's words reverberated through the restaurant, silencing the murmurs. Jonah shrunk back, humiliated, as eyes bore into him from every corner. The divide between privilege and poverty was never more evident. Elise glanced up from her tablet, the commotion finally catching her attention. Her eyes locked on Jonah as he turned to leave, the rejection weighing heavily on his shoulders. But it wasn't the man that held her gaze. It was the necklace hanging around his neck. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The pendant. That pendant. She recognized it instantly, the same one she had given her daughter, Chloe, on her 16th birthday. The last time she had seen it was 5 years ago, before Chloe vanished from her life without a trace. Her heart pounded in her chest, a flood of memories and emotions threatening to break through the walls she had built around herself. Chloe had taken that necklace with her when she left, leaving Elise with nothing but unanswered questions. Without thinking, Elise rose from her seat, abandoning her meal and her carefully constructed routine. She moved swiftly toward the door, her eyes never leaving the man who now wore her daughter's necklace. Outside, the cold air bit at Elise's skin as she hurried after Jonah, who was shuffling down the street, his head hung low. She quickened her pace, the desperation growing with each step. "Wait," she called, her voice unsteady. Jonah turned slowly, his tired eyes meeting hers. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was cautious, as if bracing for another blow. "That necklace," Elise began, her voice trembling. "Where did you get it?" Jonah's hand instinctively went to the pendant, his fingers wrapping around it protectively. It was a gift, he said vaguely, his eyes darting away. From who? Elise pressed, taking a step closer. Her heart pounded in her chest, each second feeling like an eternity. Jonah hesitated, his distrust evident. A woman. A few years back. She helped me when I was in a bad place. A woman? Elise's breath caught in her throat. Did she say her name? Jonah's eyes met hers again, this time with a flicker of recognition. Her name was Chloe. Elise's world spun, her worst fears and deepest hopes colliding in that single moment. Chloe, she was alive. And this man, this stranger, had been a part of her daughter's life when Elise hadn't been. The pain was overwhelming, but so was the desperate need for answers. Please, Elise said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You have to tell me everything. Where is she? Where did she go? Jonah sighed, rubbing his temple. I don't know. She gave me the necklace and then disappeared. I haven't seen her in a long time. Elise's heart sank, but she couldn't give up. Not now. I need your help, she said, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. I need to find her. Jonah's eyes narrowed. Why should I help you? What's in it for me? Elise hesitated. She wasn't used to bargaining with people like Jonah, but she had no choice. I can help you. I can give you food, money, whatever you need. Just help me find her. Jonah studied her for a long moment, weighing his options. He had nothing left to lose, and the woman before him, desperate, vulnerable despite her wealth, offered him a way out of his bleak existence. All right, Jonah finally said, his voice low. I'll help you. But don't make promises you can't keep. Elise nodded, relief washing over her. We'll start tomorrow. As they stood there, two people from completely different worlds, an uneasy alliance was formed. Together, they would search for Chloe, though neither of them could have predicted the dark secrets that would surface along the way. The cold morning air clung to Elise as she stood on the corner of a street she hadn't visited in years. Jonah, still wearing the necklace that had torn open the past, led the way through the city's forgotten places. His steps were slow, weighed down by years of hardship, and Elise's sharp heels clicked loudly on the cracked pavement. I used to see her around here, Jonah said, pointing to an old park with benches in disrepair. She would sit there for hours, sometimes reading, other times just staring off into space. Elise looked around, her eyes scanning every corner, hoping to spot some trace of Chloe. But all she saw were shadows of people who, like Chloe, had slipped through the cracks. The park was a world away from the life Elise had built, a life Chloe had rejected. Did she ever talk about where she was going? Elise asked, her voice tinged with frustration. The desperation was creeping back in. Jonah shook his head. Not really. She was careful, always on edge, like she was running from something. Elise's jaw tightened. Running from what? I don't know, Jonah replied, his voice low, but she didn't trust anyone. Not even me, and I was one of the few people she'd talked to. Elise fell silent, her mind racing. Chloe had been out here, alone, for years. The guilt was a weight she hadn't prepared for, and now, she was piecing together the life Chloe had hidden from her. A life filled with secrets. Jonah led Elise into a rundown bar at the edge of the city. The smell of stale beer and smoke filled the air, and the dim lighting cast shadows that seemed to cling to the corners. Elise hesitated at the entrance, her polished appearance in stark contrast to the dingy surroundings. She had never been in a place like this. She came here sometimes, Jonah said, nodding toward the bar. But this wasn't a place for friendly chats. As they approached the bartender, a gruff man with tattoos running up his arms, Jonah spoke quietly. We're looking for someone. A woman named Chloe. She used to come here. The bartender narrowed his eyes. Lots of people come through here. Why should I care? Elise stepped forward, her voice sharp. Because she's my daughter, and I'm willing to pay for any information. The bartender's gaze flicked between them, his suspicion evident. After a long pause, he leaned closer. She was here, yeah, but she was mixed up with the wrong crowd. Some real dangerous types. They used this place to meet, and she got caught up in it. What kind of people? Elise asked, her heart beginning to race. The kind you don't want to mess with. They were into all kinds of dirty business, drugs, money laundering, you name it. Your daughter got in over her head. Elise felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Chloe had been running, not just from her, but from something far worse. Where did she go? She asked, her voice barely steady. The bartender shrugged. Last I heard, she was trying to get out. Said she had to disappear for good. Haven't seen her since. Jonah turned to Elise, his expression grim. We need to move fast. If she was trying to get away from people like that, she could be in real danger. Elise nodded, her mind reeling. Chloe had been in a world she didn't understand, and now the stakes were even higher than she had imagined. Back in the quiet of her penthouse, Elise paced the floor, the weight of the bartender's words pressing down on her. Jonah sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee. The space was cold, sterile, a reflection of the life Elise had built. Everything in order, everything under control, except for Chloe. I need to know more about why you're doing this, Jonah said suddenly, breaking the silence. This isn't just about finding your daughter, is it? Elise stopped pacing, her back to him. She closed her eyes, struggling to keep her emotions in check. Of course, it's about finding her, she said, but her voice wavered. Jonah leaned forward. You're hiding something. I've lived long enough on the streets to know when someone's not telling the full truth. Elise turned to face him, her expression hardening. My relationship with Chloe was complicated, she admitted. I pushed her away. I didn't listen to her. She wanted something different from what I envisioned for her. But it's more than that now. If she's involved with dangerous people, I need to protect her. Jonah narrowed his eyes. And what about the rest of it? What aren't you telling me? Elise hesitated, her mind racing through the skeletons in her closet. She couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. Chloe left because I couldn't give her the freedom she needed. I thought I was doing what was best for her, but I was wrong. Jonah watched her closely, sensing there was more. But he didn't push. If we're going to find her, we need to work together. You're going to have to trust me, and I need to know you're not going to back out when things get tough. Elise met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. I'm not backing out. Not this time. The next day, Jonah brought Elise to a small, cluttered apartment in the lower part of the city. They knocked on the door, and after a moment, a woman in her mid-20s opened it. Her eyes widened when she saw Jonah. Katie, we need your help, Jonah said gently. We're looking for Chloe. You remember her? Katie nodded, glancing nervously at Elise. Yeah, I remember Chloe. She stayed here for a while, but then she left. Did she say where she was going? Elise asked, hope rising in her chest. Katie bit her lip, hesitating. She said she needed to get far away. She mentioned a small town, something about the Great Lakes. She wanted to disappear. I haven't heard from her since. Elise felt a mixture of relief and fear. They finally had a direction, but the idea that Chloe had been running so far made her heart ache. Thank you, Elise said, her voice softer now. Thank you for helping her. Katie gave a small nod, but her eyes lingered on Jonah. You two better be careful. If those people find out you're looking for her, they won't be happy. Jonah glanced at Elise, his expression grim. We're used to not being welcome. Elise stared out the window as the city skyline faded into the distance. The hum of the car engine filled the silence between her and Jonah. They were heading north, toward the Great Lakes, following the faint lead Katie had given them. It was a shot in the dark, but it was all they had. I never expected to be doing this, Elise said quietly, almost to herself. Chasing after my own daughter like a stranger. Jonah glanced at her, his voice calm but firm. Sometimes, it takes hitting rock bottom to see what really matters. Elise didn't respond, but the words lingered. Jonah knew more about falling from grace than she ever would. She had spent her life building walls, creating a world where she controlled everything. But now those walls were crumbling. Chloe had built her own life, one filled with pain, danger, and secrets. And Elise had been too blind to see it. As the car sped down the highway, Elise made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't stop until she found Chloe, no matter the cost. But deep down, She knew the journey wouldn't just be about finding her daughter. It would be about confronting the truth of who she was and what she had sacrificed along the way. Jonah, sensing the weight of her thoughts, turned toward her. "We'll find her," he said, his voice steady. "And when we do, you'll have your chance to make things right." Elise nodded, but a part of her wondered if it was already too late. The car slowed as it approached the small town of Maplewood. Elise gazed out the window, taking in the quaint streets lined with oak trees and the occasional passerby who waved to their neighbors. The town was the picture of serenity, a stark contrast to the chaotic whirlwind of New York City. The houses were old but well-maintained, each one adorned with gardens or picket fences. It was the kind of place Elise would have imagined raising Chloe in if their lives had been different, if Elise hadn't been so focused on building her empire. Jonah parked the car in front of a diner, its neon sign flickering in the early evening light. He glanced over at Elise, who was still lost in thought. "Looks peaceful enough," he remarked, watching a couple walk by hand in hand. "Hard to believe Chloe could be hiding here." Elise snapped back to the present. "It's quiet. Too quiet," she murmured. "If Chloe came here to disappear, she picked the right place." Jonah turned off the engine. "We should start asking around. Maybe someone here's seen her." They both stepped out of the car, and as they made their way toward the diner, Elise couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The town was charming, but there was something lurking beneath the surface, a feeling that not everything was as picture-perfect as it seemed. Inside the diner, the clink of cutlery and the hum of conversation filled the air. The place was small, with checkered tablecloths and a few locals scattered around. Jonah and Elise sat down at a booth near the window, and a friendly waitress came over, her smile warm but curious. "What can I get for you two?" she asked, pulling out a notepad. Jonah glanced at Elise before answering. "Actually, we were hoping you might be able to help us. We're looking for someone, a young woman named Chloe. She might have passed through here a while back." The waitress's brow furrowed as she thought for a moment. "Chloe, Chloe," she murmured to herself. "I don't know if I've heard that name, but there's a lady who runs the bookstore down the street. She seems to know just about everyone who comes through town. Might be worth asking her." Elise nodded. "Thank you. We'll check it out." They finished their coffee quickly and headed down to the bookstore. The small shop, nestled between a bakery and a post office, was filled with the scent of old books and the quiet rustle of turning pages. As they stepped inside, Elise felt a strange sense of calm, as if the outside world had been left behind. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver-gray hair tied in a loose bun. She wore a warm, knitted sweater, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she watched them approach. "Good afternoon," she greeted them kindly. "Can I help you find something?" Jonah took the lead. "We're looking for someone who used to live here. Her name's Chloe Montgomery. She might have worked here, or at least stopped by." The woman's face softened, and she nodded slowly. "Chloe, yes. I remember her. She worked here for a short while. Such a sweet girl, but troubled. She didn't stay long. One day she just left. No warning." Elise's heart raced. "Do you know why she left? Did she say anything?" The woman shook her head. "No, she didn't say much about her past, but I could tell she was scared. Whatever she was running from, it was big. She mentioned wanting to find a place where no one would ever find her." Elise swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to spill over. "Do you have any idea where she might have gone?" The woman looked thoughtful. "She mentioned a small town even farther up north, near the lakes. But that's all I know, I'm afraid." With the woman's words echoing in their heads, Jonah and Elise found themselves standing outside a modest apartment building, one of the last places Chloe had stayed. The landlord had let them in, explaining that no one had rented the space since Chloe left. Elise stepped inside the small room, her heart pounding in her chest. It was sparsely furnished, with only a bed, a small table, and a single window overlooking the street. Elise walked over to the bed and sat down, her hand brushing against the quilt. "She was here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jonah remained by the door, watching her carefully. "This place looks abandoned. No sign of her coming back." Elise stood up and began looking around, hoping for something, anything, that might give her a clue about Chloe's next move. She opened a drawer and found an old, worn-out journal. Her fingers trembled as she opened it to the first page. The handwriting was familiar, though jagged and hurried. I can't stay here any longer. They're going to find me if I do. Elise's breath caught in her throat as she read through the fragmented entries. Chloe had been terrified, constantly looking over her shoulder, never knowing who was coming after her. We need to figure out who she was running from, Jonah said, reading over her shoulder. And why? Elise nodded. We have to keep going. She's still out there. Jonah suggested they stop at a diner on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the kind of place Elise was used to, but she knew better than to argue. If Chloe had been hiding, this was the type of place she might have gone unnoticed. The moment they walked in, a man sitting at the counter turned toward Jonah, recognition flashing in his eyes. Jonah Reed, the man said, his voice gravelly. I didn't expect to see you around here. Jonah frowned, clearly taken aback. Do I know you? The man chuckled darkly. You don't remember me, but I remember you. You used to run with some rough people in the city. Looks like you're in better company now. He nodded toward Elise. Elise stiffened. We're looking for my daughter, Chloe. Do you know her? The man took a long sip of his drink before answering. Yeah, I know her. Saw her around here a few months back. But if you're looking for her, you'd better be careful. The people she was hiding from, they don't take kindly to being found out. Elise felt a chill run down her spine. Who are they? What do they want from her? The man leaned in, his voice low. She saw something she wasn't supposed to. Got tangled up with some real dangerous folks. They've been looking for her ever since. Jonah and Elise exchanged a glance. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted was far worse than either of them had imagined. As night fell, Elise and Jonah regrouped at their hotel. The day's revelations weighed heavily on them both. Elise sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. Chloe had been running for her life, hiding from people who wanted her silenced. And now, they were caught in the middle of it. Jonah's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He frowned as he read the message. We need to meet someone. Elise looked up, her brow furrowed. Who? An old acquaintance, Jonah said carefully. Someone who might know more about the people after Chloe. Elise hesitated. Can we trust him? Jonah sighed. Not really. But if he's willing to talk, we don't have much choice. They left the hotel and made their way to a secluded part of town, where Jonah's contact had agreed to meet them. The streets were eerily quiet, the shadows stretching long under the dim streetlights. Elise's heart pounded in her chest as they reached the meeting spot. Jonah stepped forward cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of danger. After a few tense minutes, a figure emerged from the darkness. The man's face was hidden beneath a hood, but his voice was unmistakable, cold and calculated. You shouldn't be here, the man said, his eyes darting between Jonah and Elise. You're playing a dangerous game, chasing after Chloe. Elise stepped forward, her voice unwavering. We're not backing down. If you know where she is, you need to tell us. The man smirked. I can give you a name, but that's it. After that, you're on your own. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to Jonah before disappearing into the night. Elise looked over Jonah's shoulder at the name written in bold letters. Their next lead. But with each step they took, the danger grew closer. The search for Chloe was no longer just a mission. It was a race against time. Jonah and Elise stood in front of a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of Maplewood, the same location scribbled on the paper given to them by Jonah's contact. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline and decay, and the distant hum of the city seemed a world away. Elise's nerves were on edge as she glanced around, her gut telling her that this was a dangerous step. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonah nodded grimly, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. If we want to find Chloe, we have to go through with it. He knows something, but this won't be easy. Elise hesitated, the weight of the decision hanging over her. They were walking straight into the lion's den, and she knew it. But Chloe's face, her memory, pushed her forward. Let's do this, she said finally. They approached the rusted door, Jonah knocking 3 times, a sequence his contact had mentioned. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a man with a face shadowed by the dim light inside. He stepped aside, motioning them in. "Marcus is waiting," the man grumbled, his voice cold and unwelcoming. Elise and Jonah exchanged a glance before stepping into the warehouse. The interior was as grim as the outside. Crates stacked haphazardly, and the dim glow of a few hanging bulbs did little to dispel the dark corners. Marcus stood in the center, his eyes narrowing as they approached. "Jonah Reed," Marcus drawled, his voice thick with disdain. "You must be desperate to show your face here." Jonah squared his shoulders. "We're here for information. I heard you know what happened to Chloe." Marcus smirked, leaning against a crate. "Maybe I do. But why should I tell you?" Elise stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure whatever business you're involved in here gets exposed." Marcus laughed, the sound low and menacing. "You think you have the power to threaten me, lady? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Elise didn't flinch. "I'm not bluffing. My daughter's life is on the line, and I will do whatever it takes to find her." Marcus's smile faded, his eyes locking onto Elise. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension building between them. Finally, he pushed off the crate, walking toward her. "Fine. I'll give you what you want," he said, his tone dark. "But you're not going to like what you find." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to Jonah. "This is where she's been hiding. You'd better get there fast, before they do." Jonah took the paper, his eyes scanning the address quickly. "Who's after her, Marcus? Who's behind all of this?" Marcus hesitated before answering, his voice dropping. "It's bigger than you think. Chloe saw something she shouldn't have. She's been running from a man named Vance, the kind of guy who doesn't leave loose ends. If she's still alive, it won't be for long." Elise felt her heart lurch. Vance. The name sounded too familiar, and a cold realization began to creep in. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Who is Vance?" Elise asked, her voice tight. Marcus shot her a look. "You already know the answer to that." Before she could press further, Marcus turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. "Now get out of here before you bring more trouble down on yourselves." Back at the hotel, Elise paced the room, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and guilt. The name Vance echoed in her mind, dredging up memories she had tried to bury. Jonah sat on the bed, the piece of paper with the address clutched in his hand. "Who is this Vance?" Jonah asked, breaking the silence. "You know something, don't you?" Elise stopped pacing, her back turned to him. She hesitated, knowing that once she spoke the truth, there would be no turning back. She had spent years building her life, her empire, but it was all connected to something darker, something that had now come back to haunt her. "Vance is a businessman," Elise said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "A dangerous one. He's been involved in shady dealings for years, drugs, extortion, money laundering. I did business with him once. I didn't know how deep his connections ran until it was too late." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "You're saying you were part of this?" Elise turned to face him, her expression pained. "I didn't know what he was involved in. By the time I found out, I was already in too deep. Chloe must have stumbled onto something that could destroy him. That's why she's been running." Jonah stood, his jaw tight. "And now this Vance is after her because of you." The words hit Elise like a punch to the gut. She had always prided herself on her control, her ability to protect her life and her business. But now, the walls were crumbling, and Chloe was paying the price. "I didn't know," Elise whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen." Jonah's gaze softened, though his frustration remained. "We have to find her, before Vance does." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. "We will. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Later that night, Elise and Jonah sat together in the dimly lit hotel room, the silence between them heavy but no longer filled with distrust. They had both revealed pieces of themselves, Elise's guilt, Jonah's growing sense of responsibility for Chloe, and now they were united by a shared goal. "I've made mistakes," Elise said quietly, staring at the floor. "I wasn't a good mother. I pushed Chloe away, and now she's paying for my choices." Jonah looked at her, his voice soft. "We've all made mistakes, but now we have a chance to fix them." Elise met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude. She had spent years building walls to keep people out, but in this moment, she realized that she couldn't do this alone. She needed Jonah, just as Chloe had. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping me." For helping her. Jonah gave a small nod. "We're in this together now. We'll find her. And when we do, you'll have your chance to make things right." Elise nodded, her resolve strengthening. She wouldn't let her past destroy Chloe's future. Not if she could help it. The next morning, armed with the address Marcus had given them, Elise and Jonah set out for the location. It was an abandoned motel on the outskirts of town, a place that looked as if it hadn't seen visitors in years. The air was thick with tension as they parked the car and approached the building. "She was here," Jonah murmured as they stepped inside one of the rooms, the door creaking on its hinges. The room was small and bare, with a bed pushed against the wall and a single window overlooking the empty parking lot. Elise's eyes scanned the room, her heart pounding. There was no sign of Chloe, but she could feel her presence here, like a shadow lingering in the corners. Jonah moved to the nightstand, opening the drawer. Inside was a phone charger and a crumpled piece of paper. He pulled it out and unfolded it, his eyes narrowing as he read. "It's a bus schedule," he said, showing it to Elise. She must have been planning to leave. Elise's heart leapt. "She's still moving. We're close." But as they turned to leave, a noise outside made them freeze. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoed in the distance. Jonah's expression darkened. "They're here," he muttered. Elise's pulse quickened as they moved toward the exit, but it was too late. The moment they stepped outside, a group of men emerged from behind the building, their faces hard and menacing. At the front was a man Elise recognized instantly, Vance's enforcer, a man who had once intimidated her into silence. "Going somewhere?" the enforcer sneered, his hand resting on the gun at his side. Jonah moved in front of Elise, shielding her. "We don't want trouble." The enforcer laughed. "Too late for that. Vance wants Chloe. You two are just in the way." The tension exploded in an instant. The men rushed forward, and Jonah tackled the first one, knocking him to the ground. Elise tried to move, but another man grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She struggled, fear coursing through her veins. Jonah fought with everything he had, but they were outnumbered. He took a blow to the head, falling to the ground, his vision blurring. Elise screamed, trying to break free, but the enforcer only tightened his grip. "Tell Vance we're coming for him," Jonah growled, pulling himself up despite the pain. "He won't win." The enforcer's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. He released Elise, shoving her away. "You're making a big mistake." With that, he and his men retreated, leaving Jonah and Elise bruised but alive. Elise rushed to Jonah's side, helping him to his feet. "We're running out of time," Jonah said, his voice hoarse. "We need to find Chloe before they come back." Elise nodded, her heart pounding. The danger was closer than ever, but she wasn't giving up. Not now, not when they were so close. The drive back to Maplewood was silent, the tension between Jonah and Elise thick in the air. They both knew they were on borrowed time. Elise's knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing with every possible scenario. They had barely escaped the confrontation, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a bigger trap. Jonah, seated beside her, clutched his head where the blow had landed, his mind set on one thing: finding Chloe before Vance's men did. "We're running out of time," Jonah said, breaking the silence. His voice was low but urgent. "If those guys are still looking for her, we have to assume they know where she is too." Elise swallowed, her eyes darting toward him. "Do you think Marcus set us up?" Jonah hesitated. "Maybe, but we don't have any other leads. We have to keep going." Elise nodded, but her stomach twisted with unease. She didn't trust Marcus, and now, with Vance's men closing in, every step felt like a risk. But there was no turning back, not when Chloe's life was at stake. They pulled into the small town's main street, parking in front of the bookstore they had visited before. As they got out of the car, Elise's heart raced. The weight of her past choices and the danger of the present moment pressed in on her. This was their last chance. Inside, Martha, the elderly bookstore owner, looked up from behind the counter as they entered. Her face softened with recognition, but there was a new wariness in her eyes. "You're back," she said, her voice calm but laced with concern. "We need your help," Elise said, stepping forward. "Please, if you know where Chloe is, you have to tell us. We don't have much time." Martha's gaze flickered between them, her lips pressing into a thin line. After a long pause, she sighed. "She's been hiding for a reason. You know that. The people after her, they won't stop until they find her." Elise's voice broke with emotion. "I'm her mother. I need to keep her safe." Martha studied Elise for a moment, then nodded slowly. "She's not far from here. She's been staying at a house on the edge of town. I'll give you the address, but you need to be careful. If they're already after her." Elise nodded, grateful but filled with dread. "Thank you. We'll be careful." The house was small and secluded, tucked away at the edge of a wooded area just outside of Maplewood. It looked abandoned from the outside, but Jonah and Elise knew better. Chloe had been running for years. She knew how to stay hidden. As they approached the front door, Elise's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't seen her daughter in 5 long years. So much had changed. Had Chloe changed, too? Would she even recognize the woman her daughter had become? Jonah knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness of the woods. They waited in silence, the tension thick in the air. Elise held her breath, her heart racing. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a young woman with light brown hair and familiar green eyes. "Chloe." Elise's breath caught in her throat. "Chloe," she whispered, her voice trembling. Chloe froze in the doorway, her eyes widening as she recognized the woman standing before her. "Mom." For a moment, neither of them moved, the weight of years of separation hanging between them. Then, without warning, Chloe stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Elise, holding her tightly. "I thought I'd never see you again," Chloe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Elise hugged her daughter fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry for everything." Chloe pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with pain and relief. "You found me, but how?" Jonah stepped forward. "We've been looking for you. We know what you've been running from. Vance's men are after you. We need to get you out of here." Chloe's expression darkened at the mention of Vance. "I've been hiding for so long. I didn't think anyone could help me." "We're here now," Elise said firmly. "We'll protect you." Inside the house, Chloe sat on the edge of the worn-out sofa, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Elise and Jonah sat across from her, the small living room filled with an almost suffocating silence. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Chloe began, her voice shaky. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Vance's people were making a deal, drugs, money laundering, everything. I couldn't stay quiet." Elise felt her stomach twist. She had known Vance was dangerous, but she had never realized the full extent of his criminal empire. "I tried to tell someone," Chloe continued, her voice breaking, "but Vance found out, and I had to run. I didn't know who to trust anymore." Elise reached for Chloe's hand, her eyes filled with regret. "I should have been there for you. I should have listened when you tried to tell me. But I'm here now, and I promise I won't let anyone hurt you." Chloe squeezed her mother's hand, tears welling in her eyes. "I just didn't know where else to go. I didn't want to drag you into this mess." Jonah leaned forward. "We're all in this together now. We need to make sure Vance's men don't find you. Do you have any idea where they are?" Chloe shook her head. "They've been following me for years, but I never knew how close they were." Elise glanced at Jonah, worry flickering in her eyes. "We can't stay here. It's not safe." As they prepared to leave the house, the sound of approaching footsteps outside stopped them cold. Elise's heart leapt into her throat. Jonah signaled for them to stay quiet as he peeked through the window. "Vance's men," he whispered, his voice tense. "They found us." Elise felt a surge of fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. Chloe was the priority. She had to keep her daughter safe. Jonah moved quickly, locking the front door and motioning for Elise and Chloe to move toward the back of the house. "We need to get out through the woods. If we're quiet, We can slip away before they get inside. But just as they reached the back door, it burst open. One of Vance's enforcers stood there, his gun drawn, a menacing smile on his face. Going somewhere, he sneered. Jonah moved to shield Elise and Chloe, his hands raised. We don't want trouble. The enforcer laughed darkly. It's too late for that. Vance wants Chloe, and he's not leaving without her. Elise's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. You won't touch her. The enforcer's smile faded as he took a step closer, his gun still trained on them. You can't stop this. But just as he reached for Chloe, Jonah lunged forward, knocking the man off balance. The gun clattered to the ground, and in the chaos, Elise grabbed Chloe's hand, pulling her toward the woods. Run! Elise shouted, her voice hoarse. They sprinted through the trees, the sounds of struggle behind them growing fainter as they ran. Elise's legs burned, her heart racing, but she refused to stop. Chloe's safety was all that mattered now. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the woods, breathless and exhausted. They had managed to escape Vance's men, but the danger wasn't over. We have to go to the police, Jonah said, his voice firm. This can't go on. Vance needs to be stopped. Chloe hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. What if they find me again? They won't, Elise said, her voice filled with determination. We'll make sure of it. The next morning, they went to the local police station, armed with the evidence Chloe had gathered over the years. The police chief, after hearing their story, assured them that they would be protected. An investigation into Vance's empire was launched, and within days, Vance and his men were arrested. With the threat eliminated, Chloe finally felt safe for the first time in years. She stood outside the police station with Elise and Jonah, the weight of the past slowly lifting from her shoulders. I never thought this would be over, Chloe said softly, her eyes filled with relief. Elise smiled, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. It's not over, Chloe. It's just the beginning. Jonah, standing beside them, gave a small nod of approval. You've got your whole life ahead of you now. As they left the police station, the sun rising on a new day, Elise knew that their journey wasn't just about finding Chloe. It was about finding themselves. And for the first time in years, they were finally free.